pragmatically, I can make a really good argument that I think it's better in most cases to use someone's pronouns. And I don't think it's necessarily lying to somebody unless I am
Ruslan.
So you, I believe, at some point came out on pronouns, and that was controversial. And someone wrote an article. I covered. I don't remember who it was. So forgive me for not knowing the name. But some lady wrote an article and came down and said Christians who use pronoun, like they basically were like
trampling on the blood of Christ. Is one of the phrases.
I'm like, wait a minute. You know, to be fair, I've never been in a situation where I'm presented with, do I use the pronouns? Do I not use the pronouns?
Okay.
I would venture up to say I would probably just call that person by their name,
Sure.
whatever name they're asking me to call them, you know?
Yeah.
So unpack where you're at with the pronouns thing and how did you come to that conclusion?
Let me begin. There's been more recent articles on it, which is interesting. I published a book on the trans conversation called Embodied. And I have a whole chapter on like bathrooms, pronouns, and so on. And that was 2.5 years ago. And I've written on it before that. So this isn't, I don't know why it's flaring up now, but there's been some recent articles written that I think very much misrepresent, or at the very least underrepresent my actual argument. Let me begin by saying I think it's complicated. I think this is not a black and white, here's the right response, here's the wrong response. It is very complicated because language is complicated. And interacting in a secular society with a Christian worldview where language is shared social space between me and my worldview and this person who has a completely different worldview, like the language is that's complex. That's a complex shared social space. So part of my goal is to help people to appreciate the complexity. So wherever you end up landing on it, be a little less dogmatic maybe, and be like, try to understand where somebody else is coming from. So I spent like 10 pages on this in my book. The first 5 pages is just that, like showing here's the good arguments for this side, good arguments for that side. You know, the big argument against pronoun use is, you know, you're lying to them, or you're, one of my friends says, I don't want to feed someone's delusion, you know, which I'm like, I get what you're saying. Maybe that phrase isn't, I've never won someone to Christ by calling them delusional, but the other side is that, you know, we're kind of meeting people where they're at, not demanding that they use language in a way that resonates with our worldview. And it's a give and take. Like, and there are certain, I'm a big fan of Orwell's 1984, you know, where language is, when people start manipulating language and forcing people to use terms, like I'm very concerned about that. I'm not naive to that. But on an interpersonal level, I have landed on the view, having thought through it, you know, that I will, in an attempt to meet someone where they're at, use the pronouns they want. So let me say this, every single person that I know in my life that came to Christ and ended up either detransitioning, or some weren't fully transitioned anyway, who now are fine using their pronouns that match their biological sex. Like now they're, you know, would identify with their biological sex. Hands down, every single one said if that was forced on me when I first came to Christ, or even not yet coming to Christ, I would have ran the other way. I needed space to wrestle, to be on a journey, to process this new way of thinking, you know, and Christians that didn't even go there with they just used my pronouns. I wanted to be around them, and then we walked to Christ together, and my discipleship started to mature, and then I ended up saying, yeah, maybe I should use pronouns that match my biological sex. So pragmatically, I can make a really good argument that I think it's better in most cases to use someone's pronouns. And I don't think it's necessarily lying to somebody unless I am saying I believe you. So if I meet a biological female, they want me to refer to them as they, them, or he, him. If I'm in relationship, I don't want to give the impression that I actually agree with their view of themselves. But I want to say, okay, I believe pronouns should match your biological sex. That's my worldview. It's what I believe, you know. Hope you're okay with me believing that. Now, as a gesture of hospitality, this is obviously very important for you, so I will use your pronouns. But I don't want to give the impression that I am fully agreeing with everything they believe about themselves. So, and if they demand that I do agree with it, no relationship can be healthy if one party demands you agree with everything they believe, especially if it's something that's not accurate, you know, not scientific. So anyway,
I think
that's the short version of a very long complex.
I think the complicated part is even the non-binary. I was talking to a friend of mine, and we have a mutual acquaintance that I don't really speak to anymore, and he they were telling me that they use this like we they
Oh yeah,
language.
That's hard. It's,
You know,
yeah,
and
yeah.
he's like, we're on our way, and he's like, wait, who are you bringing with you? And he's like, no, bro, pronouns. And he's like, oh, my bad. You know, it's like, well, like if you're using this like we they, you know, it just it almost becomes incoherent at times to even engage in a you know, like if I've like whenever you read an article about someone that identifies as non-binary. And you're like, wait, they? Like, what? Like, hold on. And it's like, oh, no, that's the person's pronouns. Hey, you want to see something crazy? Over 50% of the people who watch this channel are not subscribed. And out of the people that are subscribed, less than 10% actually have their bell notification on. So do me a solid. Please make sure you hit that subscribe button. Make sure the bell notification is turned on so you don't miss anything we got going here. All right? Peace.
I don't. One of the biggest questions is how much of this is like medical and scientific, and how much is social. And well, some people use the word trendy. Well, so you know, my daughter was in a theater class a few years ago. You know, a bunch of 13-year-old girls. You know, and I think she said of the 15 kids, like 13 of them had alternative pronouns. Okay.
Wow.
Now, according to the DSM, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, the latest edition, 2013, 0.014% of people had a diagnosis of gender dysphoria, like a clinical diagnosis. It's pretty rigorous. Like they have to match, I forget, 5 or 6 of 10 criteria to be diagnosed with this psychological condition. So when you have like, you know, 50 to 75% of say junior high girls using alternative pronouns, do they all experience clinically diagnosed gender dysphoria? I
probably unlikely.
Could it be socially in certain environments contagious? Call it trendy. Call it maybe just social influences at work. I mean, you gotta have your head in the sand to say, oh no, this is all just. So part of me is kind of like, it is difficult. I don't think, especially they, them will catch on as kind of this normal societal thing. It doesn't, it's etched in the design of creation, male and female. Creation, our sexes are binary, okay? Personalities aren't binary, but biological sex is binary. So I don't think it's going to, in my opinion, last very long.
I went down the rabbit hole of the scholarly data we have on this specific conversation, and from what I read is that there's not a lot to support this idea that it's genetic, meaning that if you look at the brain with people who identify with the opposite gender, that there's nothing in their brain matter that shows that their brain is the opposite gender. So if you'd say like, because if this was real and objective and scientific, then you would take someone that's a trans man and their brain would look like, or aspects of his brain would look like a man's brain, right? And the only time that happens is after hormone replacement treatment.
Got it.
So it's like they have to get on testosterone and inject themselves to then develop the characteristics and the brain differentiation. But
hormone replacement therapy. There's
no brain difference of a trans brain versus a non-trans.
It is complicated. I have a whole chapter on, it's called the brain sex theory. And in my book on trans called Embodied, I have a whole chapter, and I spent more time researching for that chapter than any other chapter I've ever written in my entire life, because there's been data for, because it's linked to the question that's a 100-year-old scientific question on, do men and women have different brains?
Right.
Even that, there's general differences in things, but you don't. The consensus seems to be that our brains in general are not really dimorphic like our bodies are. There are general patterns of difference, but they're kind of based on stereotypes too. Like
there's definitely stereotypes, but there's also the reality of just testosterone. Like testosterone
that affects your
So if you have a guy and the average man is walking around with 10x the testosterone of the average woman, which is, if you have a healthy dose of testosterone, that's what it is. That's a huge difference in terms of how you're going to navigate, operate, your degree of competitiveness, your aggression, your sex drive, like all of that stuff is going to be different. Now, to your point, how much can that be shown on a brain scan? Apparently, from the article I saw, that they see it, the brain changing post the
Yeah.
hormone therapy.
Yeah. It's hard because there's been a lot of studies done on it, and they're all can be very highly politicized. So it's almost like you have to read 10 studies and get the rare get a scientist who doesn't have a dog in the fight, which is pretty rare. And but yeah, having combed through all those, there doesn't even the ones that did argue for brain differences, I think they overreach in both their methodology and like that. Is this post transition, post testosterone? Is it, or even our brains are elastic? Like New York cab drivers, there was a study done on New York cab drivers that their hippocampus, I think, is bigger than the average person because life actually reshapes your brain and restructures your brain. So it's kind of a chicken and egg situation. Like, did living as in a trans identity, is that because of your brain, or did that actually reshape your brain? And it's like almost impossible to tell. So I think people are starting to back off some of the brain studies because it's just, you can't really prove much from it. But.
All right, guys, we're going to go over to our Patreon exclusive. If you want the full version of this interview, there'll be an exclusive section on Patreon. I'm going to ask Preston 2 more questions. One is going to be about maps, which is way too spicy to talk about on YouTube. If you guys don't know what maps are, you could Google it, okay? And the second
or don't.
Or don't. And the second one is going to be about him kind of having Matt Chandler's back in the middle of all the controversy with Matt Chandler a little while ago. All right? So meet us over on Patreon for the rest of this conversation. Hey, if you want to see the extended version of this podcast, completely unedited, consider partnering with us in our online community for as little as $5 a month. In exchange, you get access to these podcasts as we stream them live before anyone else gets to see them. You get access to the replay of our daily after party streams, access to our private Discord server, access to discount codes, and so much more. So help us continue contextualizing the gospel through media, podcasting, and YouTube, and partner with us for as little as $5 a month. Also, be sure to follow us on the Spotify podcast app, on Facebook, and on Instagram. We're constantly posting content there that I think you'll find extremely valuable. All right? I'll see you over there. Peace.